Look like Paige Bueckers is currently going viral for all of the wrong reasons, man.
Paige Bueckers was supposed to be the golden child of women's basketball. From the moment she stepped onto the national stage, the media crowned her as the next unstoppable superstar, the face who could carry the WNBA into its next era. But as the dust settled on her transition into the professional world, reality struck harder than anyone expected.
The WNBA and old guard media has been painting a narrative that Paige was going to be better than Caitlin.
Paige didn't just stumble, she failed to secure a spot on the very team she dreamed of leading. The news shocked fans, rattled analysts, and sent social media into a frenzy. How could the player once compared to legends end up left behind? Was it overhype, unfair comparisons, or something deeper inside her game and mindset? Tonight, we dive into the unraveling of a star once destined for greatness, and the meltdown moment that has basketball fans questioning everything they thought they knew.
Some people were saying that Paige Bueckers had the best rookie debut of any player they ever seen before. Well, I'm here to tell you, Paige Bueckers failed to catch Caitlin Clark.
From the very beginning of Paige Bueckers' rise in college basketball, the media painted her as the undeniable heir to the throne. She was labeled as a generational talent, a player whose court vision, mid-range scoring, and leadership made her stand out in every highlight reel. ESPN clips, magazine covers, and endless online debates all carried one message. Paige wasn't just good. She was destined to become the next superstar of the WNBA. Broadcasters constantly compared her to legends, even suggesting she might surpass established names before she ever stepped foot in a professional locker room. For years, this hype machine built up an expectation so massive that anything less than immediate dominance would feel like a failure.
This narrative about her being better than Caitlin Clark is dead now. Oh, it's completely over.
But reality has a way of humbling even the brightest prospects. When Paige finally made her attempt to enter the league, it became clear that the jump from college stardom to professional survival was far more brutal than many imagined. The spotlight didn't dim, it intensified. Every missed shot, every turnover, every moment of hesitation was magnified under the lens of a league desperate to find its next marketable face. And unlike in college, where she could lean on her natural scoring ability and instincts, the WNBA presented a faster, tougher, and far more physical brand of basketball.
So we all know, like I stated, ESPN and many other people in the media was painting this narrative that Paige was better than Caitlin. Well, Mike stated Paige Bueckers fails to catch Caitlin Clark in points per game, assists from their rookie season, like their freshman season. See below. Clark continues to prove since the start of college, she's always been the superior player, regardless of weird, desperate media narratives.
Suddenly, her weaknesses weren't hidden, they were exposed. Fans who once celebrated her, highlight reels began questioning her efficiency. Analysts who praised her instincts started dissecting her lack of consistency in high-pressure moments. Social media, never shy about flipping the script, went from praising her every move to dragging her name into the mud with brutal comparisons. Some critics even suggested she had been more of a media creation than a proven competitor, a narrative that Paige surely never wanted attached to her career. The truth is, Paige faced an uphill battle from the moment she was positioned as Caitlin Clark's rival, while Caitlin exploded into the league with record-breaking numbers, deep three-point shooting, and instant superstar recognition. Paige found herself constantly measured against those same impossible standards, even before she had the chance to settle into her rhythm. The comparisons painted her as less than, and as the weeks went by, those narratives hardened into reality.
And I'm here to tell you, she is completely owned. Caitlin owned her. Caitlin completely owned her, bruh. Points per game, 19.2. Assists, 8. Like, just look at this. Look at this. Caitlin cooked her. In college, 26. In college, 19 for Paige. She's cooked. This whole debate about Paige being better than Caitlin is a wrap. It is over. We can put it to bed.
Paige wasn't keeping up. This isn't to say Paige lacked talent. Her skill set is undeniable, and anyone who watched her in college knows she has the foundation to succeed. But when the media creates a pedestal so high, the fall becomes inevitable. Paige didn't just fall short, she was set up to fail under the weight of impossible expectations. That's the painful truth of sports hype. It can launch a career, but it can also crush one before it even begins. And if the media's unrealistic pedestal wasn't enough, the roster decision that followed would send shockwaves through fans and critics alike.
She didn't even make first team all WNBA. And they constantly paint this narrative that she is better than Caitlin.
The announcement that Paige Bueckers failed to make the WNBA team sent ripples through the basketball world. For weeks, speculation swirled about her role, her minutes, and whether her presence could help elevate the franchise's future. What no one expected was the ultimate bombshell. Paige didn't even survive the final roster cut. For a player who had been hyped as a cornerstone of the league's future, the news landed like a gut punch. Fans immediately flooded social media, demanding explanations, while insiders began piecing together how the once promising narrative collapsed so quickly. The truth is, roster spots in the WNBA are unforgiving. With only 12 teams and extremely limited slots, even the most decorated college stars are not guaranteed a place.
Now, I'm not one to, try to throw shade at Paige, but at the end of the day, bro, they was on Caitlin pretty hard. They was riding her pretty hard last year. And despite all of the, battle-tested plays she had to go through, she proved she's better than Paige.
Veterans with years of professional experience still fight for contracts each season. And younger players often find themselves on the chopping block, no matter how flashy their highlight reels may be. For Paige, this reality hit hard. Her college accolades meant nothing once she stepped into training camp. Coaches don't care about magazine covers or social media trends, they care about performance, consistency, and fit within the team. And when it came down to those cold, hard evaluations, Paige fell short. Reports suggested that coaches had concerns about her physicality and ability to adjust to the pro level's defensive demands. While Paige excelled as a mid-range scorer, her inability to consistently create separation against stronger, faster defenders raised red flags. In a league dominated by guards who can score from deep, attack the rim, and handle relentless pressure, Paige's style seemed outdated. On top of that, her tendency to hesitate in playmaking moments contrasted sharply with teammates who thrived in aggressive, high-tempo systems. These details might sound minor to casual fans, but in the cutthroat world of professional basketball, they can mean the difference between suiting up on game night and sitting at home watching from the sidelines. The optics of her release made things worse. Just a year ago, media giants were pushing Paige as the league's next face, creating endless debates about her rivalry with Caitlin Clark. Yet here was Paige, not just struggling to find her rhythm, but failing to make the roster entirely. For supporters, it was heartbreaking. For critics, it was validation. Overnight, Paige went from being positioned as a future icon to a cautionary tale about overhype. Perhaps the most painful part was watching her reaction. Paige, who had always carried herself with composure in the spotlight, reportedly broke down when the news was delivered. Sources close to the situation described her as devastated, unable to process how quickly her dream had slipped away. That raw emotion is what fueled the meltdown narrative fans are buzzing about online. But as dramatic as this roster cut was, it didn't end the story. In fact, it was only the beginning. Because the online world was about to unleash a storm that made her heartbreak even harder to endure. The moment news broke that Paige Bueckers had failed to secure a roster spot, the internet ignited. Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok became battlegrounds where fans, critics, and even casual observers unleashed their unfiltered takes. For someone once positioned as the league's golden girl, the reaction was anything but sympathetic. Hashtags mocking her name trended within hours, and memes comparing her hype to her actual performance spread like wildfire. Social media, which once built her pedestal, now gleefully tore it down. For die-hard Caitlin Clark fans, this was ammunition. They flooded comment sections, reminding everyone that Clark had faced relentless criticism and still delivered, while Paige's media protection shielded her until reality exposed the truth. Overhyped became the most common word attached to Paige's name. Others pointed out that while Caitlin was carrying her team, breaking records, and being compared to Michael Jordan, Paige was sitting on the sidelines, unable to even make a roster. The contrast fueled a narrative that the media had chosen the wrong star to back. But it wasn't only rival fans driving the backlash. Neutral observers began questioning how ESPN and other outlets had built such a strong campaign around Paige in the first place. Commentators accused the media of force-feeding audiences, a storyline that didn't hold up under scrutiny. Old clips resurfaced of analysts saying Paige would redefine the guard position, now replayed with mocking captions. The internet thrives on irony, and Paige's fall from grace became the perfect example of a narrative collapsing in real time. Still, not all reactions were harsh. Some fans expressed empathy, pointing out the immense pressure Paige had been under since her teenage years. They argued that no young athlete could reasonably be expected to live up to the weight of being labeled the future of the league before proving themselves at the professional level. A few defenders reminded the public that other WNBA greats also stumbled early in their careers and that Paige could still bounce back. Yet even those supportive voices were drowned out by the louder wave of criticism and ridicule. The backlash wasn't confined to social media either. Talk shows and sports podcasts picked up the story, debating whether Paige's downfall was her own doing or a failure of the system that overhyped her. Some hosts were blunt, saying she never had the physical tools to thrive in today's WNBA. Others suggested she could reinvent herself overseas, following the path of many talented players who found success away from the league. Either way, the dominant tone was clear. Paige's brand had taken a massive hit. The viral storm turned her roster cut into more than just a basketball decision. It became a cultural moment. For Paige, the sting wasn't only being cut, it was knowing the world was watching, laughing, and turning her into a meme. And as the noise grew louder, comparisons to her biggest rival only intensified, setting the stage for the cruelest twist of all. When the dust began to settle, one uncomfortable truth became unavoidable. Paige Bueckers' numbers simply didn't stack up against her rivals. In college, she was celebrated as a mid-range assassin with sharp instincts. But once measured side by side with other rising stars, the gaps in her game became glaring. Caitlin Clark, for example, consistently put up jaw-dropping scoring averages that Paige never touched. Clark's deep shooting range, her ability to bend defenses with every possession, and her knack for delivering under pressure made her look like a different species of guard. Fans didn't need advanced analytics to see the contrast. Just watching the games told the story. Even outside the Caitlin Clark comparisons, Paige lagged behind other young stars fighting for their place in the league. Kelsey Mitchell, for instance, elevated her game enough to earn first-team WNBA honors. She proved she could be reliable, durable, and versatile in ways Paige hadn't yet demonstrated. Others, like Haley Jones and Ryan Howard, showed the kind of adaptability coaches crave, embracing roles beyond scoring and finding ways to impact games defensively, in transition, and with playmaking. Paige, by contrast, seemed stuck between identities, too hesitant to dominate offensively, yet not consistent enough to make up for it in other areas. The hard truth is that the WNBA doesn't forgive. Almost good enough with limited roster spots and a brutally competitive environment. Coaches expect every player to fill a role at an elite level. Paige's mid-range focus, once seen as a weapon, now looked outdated in a league obsessed with efficiency. Three-pointers and drives to the rim define modern guard play, and Paige's reluctance to expand her range left her boxed in. While her rivals were adjusting, evolving, and adding new layers to their game, Paige appeared stagnant. The media narratives only deepened the sting. ESPN and other outlets had hyped Paige as a player who could rival Clark's dominance. But the statistical reality painted a very different picture. Fans on social media began posting side-by-side stat sheets that told the whole story. Caitlin averaging over 25 points per game, Paige barely scratching 20. Caitlin piling up assists, Paige stuck at middling numbers. These graphics went viral, not just because they showed Clark's dominance, but because they revealed how far Paige had fallen, behind the narrative built for her. This comparison era is unforgiving, and Paige became its latest victim. Every missed opportunity became ammunition for critics. Every rival's success became a reminder of her shortcomings. Instead of being praised for what she did well, Paige was constantly measured by what she wasn't, and what others had already become. The conversation shifted from whether she could be the face of the league to whether she even belonged in it at all. And while these comparisons were harsh, they weren't the end of her nightmare. Because as the numbers piled up and rivals surged ahead, The emotional weight of failure finally began to crack Paige in ways the cameras couldn't ignore. No matter how Paige Bueckers tried to carve her own identity, one name loomed over everything: Caitlin Clark, from college through the pros. The two were pitted against each other by fans and media alike. Clark wasn't just succeeding, she was rewriting the rulebook. Every game seemed to bring another broken record, another viral highlight, another reason for the world to crown her as the face of women's basketball. For Paige, that shadow was suffocating. Every stumble she made wasn't judged in isolation. It was magnified because Caitlin was doing the exact opposite. The comparison wasn't entirely fair, but it was inevitable. Caitlin's deep three-pointers from near half-court had become a trademark, forcing defenses to warp around her presence. Paige, meanwhile, leaned on a more traditional mid-range style that looked less explosive in the highlight-driven era of sports media. Fans didn't care about nuances in playing style. They saw one player dominating nightly box scores and another struggling to find a rhythm. The verdict was swift. Paige had been overhyped. While Caitlin was delivering on every promise, Clark's rise also meant Paige never had the luxury of developing quietly. In past eras, a young guard might have been given time to adjust, to learn, and to refine her game without intense scrutiny. But with Caitlin drawing sellout crowds, driving TV ratings, and being hailed as the female MJ, Paige was constantly forced into direct comparison. That relentless spotlight amplified every weakness in her game. Her inconsistent three-point shooting, blasted online, her hesitation against aggressive defenders, clipped and shared on Twitter. Her absence from major awards lists, labeled as proof she was slipping further behind. The emotional toll became impossible to ignore. For years, Paige had been portrayed as a superstar. Now, every accolade Caitlin received felt like a public reminder of what Paige wasn't achieving. The media, once her greatest ally, shifted its loyalty, showering Caitlin with praise while reducing Paige to a footnote in the rivalry narrative they had once built around her. That betrayal only fueled the sense that Paige wasn't just failing, she was being left behind. Even insiders admitted the Clark effect raised expectations for everyone else. Coaches, executives, and fans expected rookies to enter the league and immediately make an impact on the scale of Caitlin. Anyone who fell short, no matter how talented, looked underwhelming by comparison. Paige wasn't just competing against her peers, she was competing against the phenomenon of Caitlin Clark, and in that race, she never stood a chance. This relentless comparison created the perfect storm. Paige wasn't only struggling on the court, she was battling the weight of being perpetually second best. And as her frustrations mounted, the inevitable happened. Her emotions boiled over, and the meltdown narrative began to take center stage. When the final roster cut was announced, Paige Bueckers' reaction quickly became the focal point of the story. For an athlete who had been praised for her poise and composure since high school, the reports of her breaking down behind closed doors sent shockwaves through the basketball community. Insiders claimed she was devastated, visibly shaken, and even in disbelief as coaches delivered the news. For Paige, this wasn't just a professional setback, it was the collapse of a dream she had been building toward for years. What made the situation more brutal was how fast her emotional state turned into a headline. Instead of respecting her vulnerability, media outlets and social platforms latched onto the word meltdown. Clips and quotes circulated suggesting she had lost control, that the pressure had finally cracked her. To critics, it was ammunition. The once anointed superstar had been exposed, not just physically on the court, but emotionally off it. To supporters, though, it was proof of just how much the game meant to her. The tears, the visible frustration, the inability to hold back her emotions, those were signs of someone who cared deeply, not someone unfit to compete. Still, in the court of public opinion, narratives form fast. The phrase Paige Bueckers meltdown trended on Twitter, becoming a shorthand for her fall from grace. Memes mocked her emotional response, twisting what was clearly a human reaction into a spectacle. For Paige, the double standard was glaring. Male athletes have long been praised for showing passion-slamming lockers, yelling at teammates, or shedding tears after a tough loss. But when she displayed raw emotion, it was spun as weakness. Beyond the noise, there was also the reality that Paige had carried an immense burden for years. From the moment she was labeled the next big thing, every step of her career was under a microscope. Injuries, expectations, comparisons to Caitlin Clark of it weighed heavily. The roster cut wasn't just another challenge. It was the moment where all those doubts, all that outside pressure, and all the years of media hype collided in a crushing blow. Her reaction wasn't surprising, it was inevitable. Behind the scenes, teammates and coaches reportedly showed compassion. Understanding that the narrative being pushed didn't reflect the truth, Paige wasn't throwing tantrums or blaming others. She was heartbroken. She had invested her entire identity into the sport, only to be told she wasn't ready. That kind of rejection is devastating for any athlete, let alone one under the brightest spotlight. But the damage was already done. The public latched onto the meltdown storyline, turning Paige into a case study for what happens when media hype collides with harsh reality. The conversation had shifted completely from her potential and skill to her emotional fragility. And as critics piled on, the question grew louder. What did those closest to her teammates, coaches, and insiders really think of Paige's fall from grace? In the wake of Paige Bueckers' roster cut, much of the public narrative was driven by fans and media pundits. But behind the scenes, the voices that mattered most were those of teammates, coaches, and insiders who had seen Paige up close. Their perspective painted a more complicated picture than the viral meltdown narrative dominating the internet. Some teammates were quick to defend Paige, emphasizing her work ethic and the energy she brought to the locker room. According to reports, several players expressed shock at the decision, noting that Paige had been one of the hardest workers during camp. One insider even shared that she often stayed late after practice, working on her shot mechanics and studying game film. Nobody can question her dedication, the source explained. She wanted it badly. Maybe too badly. That last part hinted at the tension. Her desire to prove herself might have made her press too hard when it mattered most. Coaches, however, saw things differently. While they acknowledged Paige's effort, they also pointed to her struggles adapting to the physicality of the league. One assistant coach was quoted as saying, "Paige has the skill, but right now she's a step behind. The league moves at a different pace. You don't just survive on reputation, you have to dominate your role." In other words, the coaching staff didn't doubt her talent, but they weren't convinced she was ready to handle the nightly grind of the WNBA. Executives and insiders added another layer. They noted that roster decisions are rarely about one player's ability in isolation. Salary cap restrictions, roster balance, and positional needs all factored into Paige's fate. It's not just about Paige versus Caitlin or Paige versus player X, one front office executive explained. It's about how the puzzle pieces fit. Right now, she didn't fit. That pragmatic view doesn't soften the blow for fans, but it reveals how unforgiving the professional landscape truly is. Interestingly, even some media members who once hyped Paige began to shift their tone after speaking with insiders. They admitted that while she had star potential, her development had stalled compared to rivals. Injuries earlier in her career may have slowed her progression, leaving her less explosive than she once was. Others speculated that the constant comparisons to Caitlin Clark created an unfair measuring stick, one Paige could never realistically meet. What stood out most, though, was the respect many still had for Paige's character. Players described her as humble, approachable, and genuinely passionate about the game. Coaches praised her leadership in practice, even if it didn't translate on game nights. Insiders predicted that she wasn't done that overseas opportunities, or another training camp could give her the reset she desperately needed. Still, the whispers couldn't hide the truth. Paige's aura as a guaranteed superstar had been shattered. Teammates sympathized, coaches justified, and insiders explained, but together, their voices confirmed the reality. Paige wasn't ready, and the league had moved on without her. The only question left was whether she could rebuild her career from the ashes of this setback. For Paige Bueckers, the roster cut felt like the lowest point of her career. But history shows that setbacks like this can either define an athlete or fuel their greatest comeback. The immediate reality is harsh. She will not suit up for the WNBA this season, and her name is now attached to one of the most dramatic collapses in recent memory. Yet, beneath the disappointment, a new chapter may be forming, one that determines whether Paige becomes a forgotten footnote or an inspiring redemption. One possibility is the overseas route, a path many talented players have taken when the WNBA door closes. European leagues, especially in Turkey, Spain, and France offer opportunities for players to refine their skills against strong competition while earning steady contracts. If Paige embraces that path, it could give her the chance to toughen her game, expand her range, and return to the US as a more polished player. Many WNBA stars sharpen their edge overseas before finding long-term success at home. For Paige, the international stage could become both a proving ground and a reset button. Another option lies in personal reinvention. Paige has always thrived as a mid-range shooter, but to survive in the modern game, she may need to expand her arsenal, improving her three-point shot, strengthening her frame to withstand physical defenders, and developing a more aggressive playmaking style could transform her into a guard who fits today's WNBA mold. Insiders say she has the work ethic to pull it. Often it's simply a matter of whether she's willing to reinvent herself, rather than rely on the skills that once made her dominant in college. Her brand also remains a wild card. Despite the criticism, Paige still commands a massive following. She was one of the first college athletes to benefit from NIL deals, and her name recognition hasn't completely vanished. If she plays her cards right, she could leverage that platform to stay relevant while she rebuilds. Motivational interviews, social media transparency, and showing fans the grind of her comeback could flip her narrative from overhyped star to underdog on the rise. Audiences love a redemption arc, and Paige still has the chance to script hers. Perhaps most importantly, Paige has time. At just 22, she isn't facing the clock the way veterans are. The WNBA is brutal for rookies, but with persistence and growth, doors often reopen. If she takes this failure as fuel, there's no reason she couldn't fight her way back into a roster spot in the coming years. Critics may be loud now, but basketball is a game of short memories. Another standout season overseas or a breakout training camp could flip her narrative overnight. For now, though, the question lingers. Will Paige Bueckers fade quietly into the background, remembered only for what could have been, or will she claw her way back and prove her doubters wrong? The answer lies in how she responds to this defining setback. Paige Bueckers' story has taken a dramatic turn few could have predicted. Once hailed as the future face of women's basketball, she now finds herself on the outside looking in, a reminder of how unforgiving the WNBA can be. The hype that once fueled her rise became the weight that dragged her down, magnified by constant comparisons to Caitlin Clark and other rising stars who thrived under the same spotlight. Yet this is not necessarily the end of her journey. Paige still has time, talent, and a platform that could allow her to rebuild. Whether she chooses to reinvent her game overseas, grind her way back into training camp, or lean on her brand to stage a comeback, her next steps will define her legacy. For now, she stands at a crossroads, either remembered as a cautionary tale or reborn as one of basketball's greatest redemption stories.